I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal in my 72 years. Family squabbles, forgotten promises, quiet neglect. But nothing prepared me for the day my own granddaughter turned my life into a stage, my heart into a prop, all for a few thousand views. I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I was watching, waiting for the moment to turn their spotlight back on them. Welcome to the Betrayal Revenge channel, where stories come alive through voices you've never heard told this way before. Let's dive into a tale that'll make you question trust, family, and the cost of living for likes. It all began one spring morning in a Los Angeles suburb, in a house that felt less like home and more like a stranger's dream. The air was thick with the scent of artificial vanilla, the kind that clings to your throat like a bad memory. I woke to the sound of clattering metal and muffled voices downstairs, my eyes squinting against the sunlight slicing through the curtains. For a moment, I thought I'd overslept some important day, Christmas maybe, or a family gathering I'd forgotten. At 72, the days blur together, each one a soft echo of the last. But something felt off. The house was too loud, too alive, like it was holding its breath for something I didn't understand. I shuffled out of bed, my old cotton nightgown clinging to my legs, my silver hair a tangled mess I hadn't bothered to brush. The mirror caught my reflection, tired eyes, lines carved deep from years of smiling through pain. I didn't linger. Downstairs, the noise grew sharper. The clink of glass, a burst of laughter, and then a voice I knew too well. Tessa, my granddaughter, 24 and brighter than a supernova, her life a whirlwind of followers and filters. "Hurry up, we're almost ready," she called, her tone sharp, not to me but to someone else. I paused at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister. The living room below was unrecognizable. The furniture had been pushed aside, replaced by tripods and ring lights that cast a harsh, unnatural glow. Balloons in metallic pinks and golds floated above a table draped in white linen, a three-tiered cake at its center, frosted in colors too perfect to be real. It looked like a movie set, not a home. My home. "Tessa?" My voice cracked, barely audible over the hum of equipment. She didn't hear me. She was too busy adjusting a camera, her manicured nails flashing under the lights. Her brother Logan, all of 10 years old, sat on the couch, kicking his sneakers against the floor, his face scrunched in boredom. I took a step down, then another, my bare feet cold against the wood. That's when I saw it. A banner strung across the wall, glittering letters spelling out, "Happy birthday, Grandma." My heart stuttered. Birthday? My birthday was in the fall, months away. I'd marked it quietly last year, alone with a cup of tea and a slice of bread, no one in the family noticing. So why this? Why now? I stood frozen, the questions circling my mind like a moth around a flame. Something was wrong, but I couldn't pin it down. Not yet. "Grandma, you're up!" Tessa's voice cut through my thoughts, bright and practiced, like she was reading from a script. She spun toward me, her phone already in hand, the red light of a live stream blinking. "Come on, stand right here." She pointed to a spot marked with tape on the floor, her smile wide but not reaching her eyes. I blinked, my nightgown suddenly feeling like a costume I hadn't chosen. "Tessa, what's all this?" I asked, my voice soft, almost lost in the chaos. "It's your surprise birthday party," she said, her tone so cheerful it bordered on mockery. "We're celebrating you, Grandma. Isn't it amazing?" She didn't wait for my answer, turning to adjust a light that was glaring in my face. I squinted, raising a hand to shield my eyes. "But it's not my birthday," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Tessa froze for a split second, then laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Oh, Grandma, don't be silly. We're doing it early. It's for the fans, you know. They love this stuff." The fans. Of course. Tessa's TikTok channel, her kingdom of 1 million followers, where every moment of her life was polished and packaged for likes. I'd seen her videos, her dancing in designer clothes, her heartfelt stories about family, her tears that dried the moment the camera stopped. But this, turning my life into her content? My stomach twisted, a dull ache spreading through me. "Logan, come on, let us do the line," Tessa snapped, waving her brother over. Logan sighed, dragging himself to the taped spot beside me. He looked up at me, his brown eyes wide and uncertain, before Tessa handed him a card. "Read it like we practiced," she said, her voice firm. Logan cleared his throat, his small hands clutching the card. "Happy birthday, Grandma," he mumbled, his words flat, rehearsed. Tessa groaned. "No, no, no. With feeling, Logan, like you mean it." He tried again, his voice a little louder but no warmer. By the third take, his shoulders slumped, and I saw a flicker of frustration in his eyes that reminded me of my own when I was young, trapped in a role I didn't want. I reached out, touching his arm gently. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered. He gave me a small, real smile, but Tessa wasn't watching. She was too busy checking her phone, muttering about angles and lighting. I stood there, the lights burning my skin, the camera's unblinking eye staring me down. My nightgown felt thinner than ever, my unbrushed hair a stark contrast to Tessa's sleek curls. I wasn't a grandmother in this moment. I was a prop, a backdrop for her perfect feed. The thought clawed at me, sharp and cold. Had they even thought about me when they planned this, or was I just convenient? "Smile, Grandma," Tessa called, not looking up from her screen. I tried, my lips trembling into something that felt more like a grimace. The cake loomed in front of me, its frosting gleaming under the lights, but I couldn't smell it over the chemical tang of the room. I wanted to ask why they hadn't waited for my real birthday, why they hadn't asked me what I wanted, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I stood silent, the weight of their performance pressing against my chest. That's when I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible click. The live stream was rolling, thousands of strangers watching me, judging me, all while I stood in my nightgown, unprepared, exposed. Tessa's voice rang out, bright and false. "Look at my amazing grandma, everyone! Isn't she the best?" The comments flooded in, hearts and emojis flashing across her screen, but I couldn't read them. All I could feel was the hollow space where my voice should have been. The lights burned brighter, the voices grew louder, but all I could feel was the cold truth settling in my bones. This wasn't my celebration. It was theirs. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and I was starting to see it, like a crack in a mirror you can't unsee. It was still that same spring morning, the air heavy with the hum of cameras and the weight of unspoken lies. The room pulsed with artificial energy, a stage set for a play I hadn't auditioned for. The ring lights cast stark shadows across the living room, turning familiar corners into something alien, like a memory warped by time. I stood where Tessa had placed me, the tape on the floor marking my spot like a prisoner's cell. My nightgown clung to me, thin and worn, a stark contrast to the polished chaos around me. The scent of that fake vanilla lingered, now mixed with something sharper, maybe the chemical tang of hairspray or the heat of electronics pushed too hard. Tessa's voice sliced through the hum. "Grandma, can you smile a little more, naturally?" She didn't look at me, her eyes glued to her phone, fingers swiping through comments I couldn't see. Naturally. The word stung, like a slap I hadn't seen coming. I tried to curve my lips, but my face felt stiff, as if it knew the lie before my heart did. "Like this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, hoping for a glance, a moment of connection. She didn't answer. Instead, she waved at someone behind me. "Move the light. It's casting a shadow on her face." I turned my head slightly, catching Logan's small form slouched on the couch, his sneakers still kicking rhythmically against the floor. He was watching me, his brown eyes wide but guarded, like he knew something I didn't. I wanted to ask him, to pull him aside and hear the truth in his unfiltered words, but Tessa's voice snapped me back. "Okay, let's do the cake scene again. Grandma, when Logan says his line, you hug him, okay? Big, happy hug. The fans love that." Again? I hadn't realized we'd done it once. My mind scrambled, trying to piece together the moments I'd been standing here, lost in the blur of lights and commands. "Tessa, I started, but she cut me off, her tone sharp now, like a teacher scolding a slow student. "Grandma, please, just follow the script. It's not hard." Script. The word landed like a stone in my chest. This wasn't a party. It was a performance, and I was the unwilling star. Logan shuffled over, clutching that same card, his small fingers creasing the edges. "Happy birthday, Grandma," he said, his voice mechanical, the words hollowed out by repetition. Tessa sighed, loud and dramatic. "Logan, come on. You're killing the vibe. Say it like you love her." His cheeks flushed, and he looked down, mumbling, "I'm trying, okay?" I reached out, wanting to tell him it was all right, that he didn't need to pretend, but Tessa was already resetting the camera. "One more time, and Grandma, don't look so stiff. Relax." Relax, as if I could with 1,000 invisible eyes watching me through that blinking red light. My hands trembled, and I clasped them together, hoping no one noticed. The cake sat untouched on the table, its frosting gleaming like plastic under the lights. I stared at it, willing myself to feel something, joy, gratitude, anything, but all I felt was a growing unease, a question I couldn't shake. Why was I here, standing in my own home, feeling like a stranger? "Let's move to the food now," Tessa said, her voice bright again, as if flipping a switch. She gestured to the table, now laden with dishes I hadn't noticed before. Plates of spicy wings glistening with sauce, bowls of chili flecked with red peppers, a tray of hard-crusted bread that looked like it could break a tooth. My stomach churned. At 72, with my dentures, I couldn't eat any of this. Soft foods, mashed potatoes, soups, maybe a slice of that orange cake I loved, were all I could manage. Hadn't Tessa known that? Hadn't anyone thought to ask? I took a step toward the table, my bare feet sticking slightly to the polished floor. "Tessa, this food," I began, my voice soft, careful, like I was tiptoeing around broken glass. She spun toward me, her smile tight, her eyes flashing with something close to annoyance. "What's wrong now, Grandma? It's a feast. Everyone's gonna love this spread." I swallowed, the words catching in my throat. "It's just, I can't eat spicy things or anything too hard. My teeth—" She cut me off, her laugh sharp and dismissive. "Oh, come on, Grandma, don't make this difficult. It's not about eating it. It's about how it looks on camera. Just pretend, okay? Pretend." The word echoed in my mind, each syllable a needle pricking my skin. I wasn't a person to her in this moment, not a grandmother, not family. I was a prop, a filter, a means to an end. My chest tightened, the air suddenly too thin. I glanced at Logan, hoping for an ally, but he was staring at the floor, his small hands twisting the card into a crumpled mess. "Logan," I said softly, "do you like this food?" He looked up, his eyes flickering with something real, something unguarded. "It's okay," he said, then lowered his voice, almost a whisper. "I only said the birthday stuff 'cause Tessa made me memorize it." His words hit me like a wave, cold and heavy, pulling me under. Memorize. This wasn't even his idea. It was all Tessa's script, every word, every gesture. I turned back to the table, my eyes landing on a glass of water, the only thing I could stomach. I reached for it, my fingers brushing the cool surface, and took a slow sip. The water was tasteless, but it burned going down, like I was swallowing my own unshed tears. The room kept moving around me, Tessa barking orders, the lights shifting, the camera clicking, but I felt frozen, trapped in a moment I couldn't escape. I thought of last year, my real birthday, when no one had called, no one had visited. I'd sat alone in this same house, the silence so loud it drowned out my thoughts. Had they forgotten me then, only to remember me now for this spectacle? Or had they never cared at all? I set the glass down, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. The camera kept rolling, capturing everything but the truth. The camera saw everything, every smile, every gesture, but it missed the truth. My granddaughter's world was built on likes and views, and I was just a shadow in her frame. But shadows have memories, and mine were starting to whisper. What happens when the prop decides to speak? That spring morning stretched on, the lights still glaring, the air still thick with pretense. The living room felt smaller now, the walls closing in under the weight of those relentless lights. The artificial vanilla scent had faded, replaced by a faint metallic tang from the overheated equipment, sharp enough to sting my nose. I stood at the edge of Tessa's stage, my glass of water still in hand, its cold surface grounding me as the world spun around me. Tessa was in her element, directing her party like a conductor, her voice a mix of honey and steel. "Okay, everyone, let's do the group shot. Grandma, center, please." I moved slowly, my bare feet dragging across the floor, each step heavy with a truth I couldn't yet name. Logan lingered near me, his small frame tense, his eyes darting between me and Tessa. The camera's red light blinked, unyielding, capturing a moment that felt like a theft. I forced another smile, my lips dry, my heart a dull ache. This wasn't my birthday, wasn't my celebration. It was hers, her views, her followers, her stage, and I was just, what, a prop? A pawn? The question gnawed at me, sharp and insistent. As Tessa adjusted the camera, her phone buzzing with notifications, my mind drifted to a memory, one I'd buried deep, like a letter you're afraid to open. A year ago, maybe 2, Tessa had posted a video that went viral. "My grandma cried when I surprised her with a gift," the caption read, paired with a clip of me holding a scarf, my eyes glistening. The comments had poured in. "So sweet. You're the best granddaughter." This is what family's about. But the truth? That scarf was a sponsored product, a brand deal Tessa had been paid to promote. She'd handed it to me seconds before filming, whispering, "Act surprised, okay?" I'd played along, thinking it was harmless, thinking it was just her world, not mine. But the tears? Those were real. Tears of exhaustion, a feeling like a stranger in my own skin. I blinked, the memory fading as Tessa's voice pulled me back. "Grandma, can you look happier? The fans are saying you seem tired." Tired. The word landed like a blade, cutting through the fog in my mind. I wasn't tired. I was invisible. My gaze shifted to Logan, who was now picking at a balloon string, his face a mirror of my own unease. "Logan," I said softly, leaning down, "do you know why we're doing this today?" He shrugged, his voice barely audible. "Tessa said it's for her channel. She needs a big video." A big video. My chest tightened, the air suddenly too thin. I straightened, my eyes scanning the room, the cake no one would eat, the food I couldn't touch, the banner proclaiming a lie. This wasn't a one-time act. This was a pattern, a thread woven through years of small betrayals I'd ignored. Another memory surfaced, colder, sharper. When I'd had surgery on my foot 2 years ago, I'd spent days alone in the hospital, the beeping machines my only company. Tessa hadn't visited, hadn't called. But she'd posted a video, her face streaked with tears, captioned, "Praying for my grandma's recovery." The likes had rolled in, the comments praising her devotion. I'd seen it later, lying in my hospital bed, and felt a pang I couldn't name. Now I knew what it was. Betrayal, dressed up as love. My son Franklin, Tessa's father, wasn't here today. He rarely was. I could picture him now, his tired eyes and slouched shoulders, always dismissing my concerns with a wave of his hand. "Tewessa's just young, Mom," he'd say. "She's building a future. You should be proud." Proud. The word tasted bitter, like the water I'd sipped earlier. Proud of what? Of being used? Of being erased? I thought of the times I'd tried to talk to him, to ask if he remembered the quiet moments we'd shared when he was a boy, baking cookies, reading stories, laughing over nothing. But Franklin had changed. His heart turned to Tessa's ambitions, his loyalty to her future, leaving no room for me. I set the glass down, the clink against the table louder than I'd intended. Tessa glanced over, her brow furrowing. "Grandma, what's wrong? You're not helping the vibe." The vibe. I wanted to laugh, a cold, hollow sound, but I held it back. Instead, I took a breath, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Tessa, do you remember when my real birthday is?" The question hung in the air, simple but sharp, like a pinprick in the balloon of her perfect scene. She froze, her fingers hovering over her phone, her smile faltering. Yeah, of course," she said, but her eyes darted away, searching for an answer she didn't have. I turned to Logan, hoping for honesty. "Sweetheart, do you know?" He bit his lip, shaking his head. "I thought it was today," he mumbled, his voice small, guilty. The room felt quieter now, the hum of the equipment fading into a dull roar in my ears. They didn't know. Not Tessa, not Logan, not even Franklin, who hadn't bothered to show up. My birthday, my life, it was all just content to them, a means to an end. I moved away from the taped spot, ignoring Tessa's sharp, "Grandma, where are you going?" My steps were slow but deliberate, carrying me to the small desk in the corner where I kept my papers. My hands trembled as I opened the drawer, pulling out an old envelope, yellowed with age. Inside was my birth certificate, the date printed in faded ink. I stared at it, the numbers confirming what I already knew. My birthday was months away. This party, this lie, wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. I slipped the paper back into the envelope, my fingers brushing against the rough edges. The lights still burned, the camera still rolled, but I felt a shift inside me, a clarity as cold and clear as winter air. I'd been silent for too long, swallowing their dismissals, their excuses, their betrayals. But silence wasn't surrender. It was a gathering storm. The truth was there, written in faded ink, staring back at me from a piece of paper I hadn't touched in years. My family didn't know me. Not my birthday, not my heart. I was a ghost in their story, haunting their perfect feed. But ghosts can feel pain, and mine was a wound I'd carried too long. What happens when you realize you've never been seen at all? That spring morning dragged on, the lights still blazing, the air thick with the weight of a truth I couldn't ignore. The envelope trembled in my hands, its edges worn soft by time, like a secret I'd kept even from myself. I stood by the desk in the corner of the living room, the chaos of Tessa's party fading to a dull hum behind me. The birth certificate inside was a quiet witness to the truth. My birthday was months away, a fact my family hadn't cared to remember. The realization didn't explode inside me. It settled, heavy and cold, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. I slipped the paper back into the drawer, my fingers lingering on the wood, tracing the grain as if it could anchor me to something real. The room was still a stage, the ring lights casting their harsh glow, turning the familiar into something foreign. The scent of artificial vanilla had long since dissolved, replaced by the sharp bite of overheated electronics and the faint, cloying sweetness of that untouched cake. I glanced at it now, its 3 tiers of pastel frosting gleaming under the lights, a monument to a lie. It wasn't for me. None of this was. The thought pressed against my ribs, a dull ache that spread with every breath. "Grandma, come on, we're losing the moment!" Tessa's voice cut through my haze, sharp and impatient. She stood by the camera, her phone in one hand, her other gesturing wildly for me to return to my mark. Her curls bounced as she moved, each strand perfectly placed, a stark contrast to my own unbrushed silver hair. I didn't move. My feet felt rooted to the floor, the weight of 72 years holding me in place. "Tessa," I said, my voice low, almost lost in the hum of the room. "Why this cake? Why today?" She sighed, a sound so familiar it could have been Franklin's, her father's, dismissing me with the same tired exasperation. "Grandma, it's just a cake. It looks good for the video, okay? Orange frosting is trending. It's aesthetic." Aesthetic. The word landed like a slap, stripping away the last shred of warmth I'd clung to. I stared at the cake, its vibrant orange swirls mocking me. Orange. My favorite flavor, the one I'd loved since I was a girl, sneaking bites of my mother's citrus cake in our old New Hampshire kitchen. Had Tessa known? Had she cared? Or was it just a cruel coincidence, a prop chosen for its Instagram appeal? I thought of last year's birthday, the real one. I'd waited all day hoping for a call, a visit, even a text. Nothing came. I'd sat in this same house, the silence so thick it pressed against my skin, and eaten a slice of plain bread with a cup of tea. I'd told myself it didn't matter, that my family was busy, that love didn't need a date on the calendar. But now, standing here, I saw it clearly. They hadn't forgotten. They'd chosen not to care. The memory stung, sharp and raw, like a splinter lodged too deep to pull out. I turned to Logan, who was hovering near the table, his small hands fidgeting with a napkin. "Logan, sweetheart," I said, my voice soft, coaxing. "Did you pick this cake?" He looked up, his brown eyes wide, caught off guard. "No," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Tessa got it. She said the orange one looks best on camera. Nobody's going to eat it, though. It's just for the video." His words were innocent, but they cut deeper than any blade, just for the video. I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside, something cracked, a fragile hope I hadn't realized I was still holding. I moved toward the table, my steps slow, deliberate, as if testing the ground beneath me. The food was still there, untouched, the spicy wings and hard breads a silent taunt. I thought of the orange cake I'd always wanted, the one I'd mentioned to Franklin years ago, back when he still listened. Just a small one, I'd said, with that soft, citrusy frosting. Nothing fancy. He'd nodded, promising to get it for my next birthday. But the next birthday came, and the one after that, and no cake ever arrived. Forgot, he'd mumbled once, shrugging it off. I'll get it next time, Mom. Next time never came. Tessa's voice broke through again, sharper now. Grandma, we need you for the toast shot. Can you just cooperate? Cooperate. As if my presence here was a favor to her, not a theft of my dignity. I looked at her, her face lit by the glow of her phone, her eyes scanning comments from strangers who knew nothing of me. Tessa, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands, did you ever ask what I wanted for my birthday? She blinked, caught off guard, her smile faltering. What? I mean, this is what people love, Grandma. Big parties, big cakes. It's not about the details. Not about the details. The words echoed in my mind, each one a brick in the wall between us. I thought of the nights I'd spent sewing quilts for Tessa when she was a child, each stitch a prayer for her happiness. I thought of the stories I'd told Logan, the way his laughter had filled this house with light. I thought of Franklin, my boy, who once clung to my hand during thunderstorms, now too busy to call. Had I ever been more than a backdrop to them, a filter to make their lives look brighter? I turned away, my gaze falling on the staircase leading to my room. The noise of the room, Tessa's commands, the hum of the camera, Logan's soft fidgeting, faded as I climbed the steps, each one a quiet rebellion. My room was a sanctuary, untouched by the chaos below. The air was cooler here, carrying the faint scent of lavender from a sachet I'd tucked into my dresser. I closed the door behind me, the click of the lock a small, defiant sound. I sat at my small desk, pulling out my journal, its leather cover worn soft by years of secrets. My pen moved slowly, the ink bleeding into the page as I wrote, "They didn't know my birthday. They didn't know me." The words looked stark, final, like a verdict. I paused, my hand trembling, and let my mind wander to a question I'd never dared ask aloud. Had I ever been a person to them, flesh and blood, with dreams and pains? Or was I just a role, mother, grandmother, prop, existing only to serve their story? The silence in my room was a shield, but it couldn't drown out the truth. My family had turned me into a prop, a shadow in their spotlight. I'd been invisible for too long, my pain buried under their lies. But what happens when a shadow steps into the light? I was about to find out. That spring day lingered, the house still buzzing with Tessa's staged celebration, but I was no longer just a bystander. The air in my room was cool, heavy with the scent of lavender and old paper, a stark contrast to the artificial chaos downstairs. I sat at my desk, my journal closed, its leather cover warm under my fingertips. The words I'd written, they didn't know me, burned in my mind, each syllable a spark igniting something I hadn't felt in years. Resolve. The hum of Tessa's party filtered through the floorboards, her sharp commands, the clink of glass, the low buzz of the camera. But up here, in this small sanctuary, I was free to think, to see, to act. I leaned back in my chair, my eyes drifting to the window. The Los Angeles suburbs stretched out beyond the glass, all manicured lawns and sun-bleached rooftops, a world that felt as staged as the scene below. My hands, lined with 72 years of quiet labor, rested in my lap, steady despite the storm inside me. I'd spent decades swallowing their dismissals, their betrayals, telling myself it was love, that family meant enduring. But love doesn't erase you. Love doesn't turn you into a filter for someone else's fame. A memory flickered, sharp and unbidden. Last year, Tessa had posted a video of me reacting to a gift. A necklace, another sponsored prop. She'd coached me to smile, to gasp, to play the grateful grandmother. I'd done it, thinking it was a small thing, a way to support her dreams. But later, alone, I'd seen the comments. Your grandma's so lucky to have you. What a beautiful family. Each one had twisted the knife deeper because none of it was real. The necklace sat untouched in a drawer, its cheap metal tarnishing, just like her promises. I stood, my bare feet sinking into the soft rug, and crossed to my dresser. My phone, an old model Franklin had handed down, sat charging on the nightstand. I picked it up, the screen's faint glow casting shadows across my wrinkled hands. I wasn't tech-savvy. Tessa had always laughed at my fumbling attempts to navigate her world of apps and algorithms, but I knew enough. Enough to record, enough to share, enough to turn their spotlight back on them. I opened the camera app, my thumb hovering over the record button. My heart thudded, not with fear, but with a strange, fierce clarity. I slipped out of my room, moving quietly down the stairs, each step deliberate, like a hunter stalking prey. The living room was still a circus of lights and props, but now I saw it differently, not as a stage, but as evidence. Tessa was yelling at Logan, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Come on, Logan, stop fidgeting! You're ruining the shot!" Logan's small face crumpled, his hands twisting the hem of his shirt. "I'm trying, Tessa," he muttered, his voice thick with frustration. I pressed record, the phone steady in my hands, capturing every moment. Tessa turned to her assistant, a nervous young woman hovering by the camera. "Fix the lighting, it's too yellow. This looks cheap." Her tone was venomous, her face contorted in a way her followers never saw. The assistant scurried to obey, nearly tripping over a cable. I zoomed in, catching the sweat on Tessa's brow, the way her smile vanished the moment she thought no one was watching. This wasn't the Tessa of her polished videos, the one who cried on cue and called me her hero. This was the real her, demanding, dismissive, cruel. I moved closer, staying in the shadows, my nightgown blending into the dim corners of the room. The phone screen showed Logan slumping onto the couch, his eyes red-rimmed. Tessa spun toward him, her voice low but vicious. "Get up, Logan, you're not done. And Grandma—" She glanced around, realizing I wasn't in my mark. "Where's Grandma? She's making this so hard." Making this hard. The words seared into me, fueling the fire in my chest. I kept recording, capturing her impatience, her disregard, her truth. The party dragged on, but I was no longer part of it. I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me. The house was quiet now, the last of Tessa's crew gone, the lights dimmed. I sat on my bed, the phone heavy in my hands, the video waiting like a loaded gun. My fingers trembled as I opened Facebook, an app I rarely used, its blue glow unfamiliar but not daunting. I uploaded the video, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and defiance. The caption came easily, each word a blade honed by years of silence. This is what my birthday really looked like. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the post button. A part of me, the part that had always smoothed things over, that had forgiven and forgotten, whispered to stop, to let it go, to stay invisible. But another part, stronger, fiercer, pushed back. This wasn't revenge, not yet. It was truth, raw and unfiltered, the kind Tessa's camera could never capture. I pressed post, the soft click of the button echoing in the quiet room like a door slamming shut. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, the phone on my lap, its screen dark but alive with possibility. The suburb outside was still, the streetlights casting long, lonely shadows across the lawn. My mind raced, replaying the video in my head. Tessa's sharp words, Logan's defeated slump, the cake no one touched. I thought of Franklin, who hadn't even shown up, and the years I'd spent hoping he'd see me again, the way he did when he was a boy. I thought of Tessa, my bright, ambitious granddaughter, who'd traded my love for likes, and I thought of myself, Martha, 72 years old, no longer willing to be a ghost. The phone buzzed, a single notification lighting up the screen. Someone had shared my post, then another, and another. I didn't look, not yet. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of what I'd done settle over me. The storm I'd unleashed was just beginning, and I was ready to face it, calm, steady, unyielding. I'd lit a match with a single post, and now the flames were spreading. My granddaughter's world of likes and filters was crumbling, and I'd sparked it all, not with anger, but with truth. But what does it feel like when the stage you've built your life on burns to the ground? The night after I posted the video stretched into dawn, the house silent, but the world outside was anything but. The first light of morning crept through my bedroom window, painting the walls in soft golds and pinks, a quiet beauty that felt like a betrayal of the storm inside me. I hadn't slept. My phone, still clutched in my hand, buzzed relentlessly, its screen a chaos of notifications I hadn't dared to open. The video I'd posted, those raw, unfiltered moments of Tessa's cruelty, Logan's defeat, my own silent rebellion, had taken on a life of its own. I could feel it, even without looking. The world was watching, and Tessa's perfect feed was unraveling. I sat on the edge of my bed, my nightgown creased from hours of restless sitting, the lavender scent of my room now faint, overpowered by the stale air of a night spent in thought. My hands, lined with the weight of 72 years, were steady, but my heart raced, a drumbeat of anticipation and dread. I'd meant to expose the truth, to step out of the shadows, but I hadn't expected it to feel like this, like standing on the edge of a cliff, the ground crumbling beneath me. Downstairs, the house was eerily quiet, the remnants of Tessa's party still scattered across the living room, deflated balloons sagging on the floor, the untouched cake now slumped under its own weight, its orange frosting cracking like a broken promise. I moved slowly, my bare feet brushing the cold hardwood, avoiding the taped marks where I'd been told to stand. The ring lights were gone, packed away by Tessa's crew, but their glare lingered in my mind, a reminder of the stage I'd refused to play on. I opened my phone, the screen's glow harsh against the dim room. The notifications were overwhelming, hundreds, then thousands, a tidal wave of shares, comments, and reactions. I scrolled, my breath catching, as I saw the headlines that had begun to surface. TikToker exposed, Grandma's birthday was all for show. Read one article. Another, sharper, Pacific Grandma vows revenge on granddaughter's fake family content. My video had gone viral, its hashtag across platforms. I paused on a comment, the words simple but piercing. This broke my heart. She deserves better. My chest tightened, not with triumph, but with a strange, hollow relief. For years, I'd been invisible, my pain buried under Tessa's curated smiles and Franklin's dismissive shrugs. Now the world saw me, not the grandmother in Tessa's videos, but Martha, a woman with a voice, a story, a wound. I set the phone down, my fingers trembling, and let the weight of it sink in. I hadn't wanted this, not the attention, not the chaos, but I needed it, needed to be seen. The silence shattered with the sound of the front door slamming open. Footsteps pounded up the stairs, and before I could move, Tessa burst into my room, her face a mask of fury and desperation. Her usual polish was gone, her hair was tangled, her makeup smudged, her eyes wild with something close to panic. "Grandma, what did you do?" she screamed, her voice raw, cracking under the strain. She held her phone up, the screen flashing with comments, each one a dagger to her carefully crafted world. "My channel's ruined! The comments are locked, brands are pulling out, everything's falling apart." I stood, my back straight, my gaze steady despite the storm in her eyes. "Tessa," I said, my voice calm, almost gentle, "I showed the truth, that's all." She laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed in the small room. "The truth? You think this is about truth? You've destroyed me. My followers, my sponsors, they're gone. Do you even care?" Her words were meant to wound, but they glanced off me, their edges dulled by years of her indifference. I looked at her, really looked, and saw not my granddaughter but a stranger, consumed by a world that valued views over love. "Tessa," I said, stepping closer, my voice low but firm. "Did you ever think about what this felt like for me? Standing there, in my nightgown, while you turned my life into a show?" She froze, her lips parting, but no words came. For the first time I saw a flicker of something, guilt maybe or shame, cross her face, but it was gone as quickly as it came. She shook her head, tears spilling over. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean it like that. I needed the content. I needed to keep going. You don't understand how hard it is." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Her apology was a reflex, not a reckoning, and it changed nothing. I thought of Logan, his small voice confessing he'd been made to memorize lines, and Franklin, who hadn't even shown up to this farce. I thought of the years I'd spent hoping for their love, only to find it was conditional, tied to their needs, their image. The pain was still there, but it was quieter now, overshadowed by a clarity that felt like freedom. Tessa sank onto the bed, her sobs loud and jagged, her phone slipping from her hand to the floor. "I've lost everything," she whispered, her voice breaking. "The brands, the deals, my future, it's all gone." I watched her, my heart heavy but unyielding. I didn't feel joy, didn't feel the thrill of revenge. I felt lighter, as if a weight I'd carried for years had finally lifted. I'd torn down her stage, not to hurt her, but to free myself. Tessa's world had crumbled, her perfect feed reduced to ashes by a single truth. I'd expected to feel something, triumph maybe, or relief, but all I felt was a quiet emptiness. The storm I'd unleashed had swept through, and now the wreckage was at my feet. But what do you do when the apologies come, and they're not enough to heal the wounds? The morning after Tessa's collapse stretched into a heavy, gray afternoon, the house still echoing with the weight of what I'd done. The air in my room felt stale, thick with the lingering scent of lavender now dulled by the weight of the day. I stood by the window, the Los Angeles suburb outside cloaked in a soft drizzle, the kind that blurs the edges of everything, lawns, rooftops, even my own reflection in the glass. My phone sat silent on the dresser, its screen dark after hours of buzzing chaos. The video I'd posted had done its work. Tessa's channel was in ruins, her sponsors gone, her followers turning away. The hashtag still trended, a chorus of strangers amplifying my truth. But the victory, if you could call it that, tasted like ash. I turned from the window, my nightgown brushing my ankles, its familiar softness a small comfort against the ache in my chest. At 72, I'd seen enough to know that truth doesn't always bring peace. It exposes, it wounds, it leaves you standing in the rubble, wondering what comes next. I'd wanted to be seen, to step out of the shadows Tessa and Franklin had cast me into. Now I was seen, by millions it seemed, but the cost was a family fractured beyond repair. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, cutting through the quiet. My heart sank, a reflex honed by years of bracing for disappointment. I knew who it was before I reached the stairs. Tessa stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen, her usual polish stripped away. She looked smaller, fragile, like a child caught in a storm she hadn't foreseen. "Grandma," she said, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper, "can I come in?" I stepped aside, saying nothing, my hands clasped to keep them steady. She shuffled into the living room, her sneakers leaving faint wet marks on the hardwood. The remnants of her party were still there. Crumpled napkins, a half-deflated balloon caught in a corner, the cake now collapsed into a sticky heap. She didn't look at it. Instead, she sank onto the couch, her hands twisting in her lap, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I'm sorry," she said, the words tumbling out, raw and uneven. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I needed the content, the views. Without you, my channel's nothing. It's just a hollow shell." Her words hung in the air, heavy with a truth she hadn't meant to admit. I stood across from her, my back straight, my gaze steady, searching her face for something real, regret maybe, or love, but all I saw was desperation, a need to salvage what she'd lost. "Tessa," I said, my voice low, calm like the drizzle outside. "Your channel was always hollow. I just held a light to it." She flinched, her lips trembling, but she didn't argue. Instead, she leaned forward, her voice breaking. "I know I messed up. I used you and I shouldn't have, but I can fix it, Grandma. I'll make new videos, real ones about us. We can rebuild it together, please." Her eyes met mine, pleading, but they were the eyes of a stranger. Not the girl I'd rocked to sleep, not the granddaughter I'd sewn quilts for. That Tessa was gone, buried under layers of ambition and likes. I thought of the years I'd spent hoping for her to see me, to remember the woman who'd braided her hair and taught her to bake. I thought of Logan, forced to recite lines he didn't believe, and Franklin, whose absence was its own kind of betrayal. I thought of the orange cake I'd never gotten, the birthdays they'd forgotten, the hospital room where I'd lain alone. Each memory was a stone in a wall I'd built to protect myself, and Tessa's words, earnest as they seemed, couldn't breach it. The phone in my pocket buzzed, a single notification breaking the silence. I ignored it, but Tessa's eyes flicked toward the sound, a reminder of the world still watching. "Grandma," she said, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "I need you. I'm sorry." I looked at her, my heart heavy but unmoved. "Tessa," I said, each word deliberate, "you're sorry because you lost your channel, not because you lost me." Her face crumpled, tears spilling over, but I felt no urge to comfort her. The anger I'd carried for so long was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet clarity. I wasn't her prop anymore, wasn't her filter. I was Martha, and I was enough. The doorbell rang again, softer this time, and I knew it was Franklin before I opened it. He stood there, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with a fatigue that went beyond the years. "Mom," he said, his voice weak, "I'm sorry. I should have been here. I should have seen you." His words were a faint echo of Tessa's. Too late, too little. I looked at him, my son, the boy I'd raised, now a man who'd chosen his daughter's ambition over his mother's heart. "Franklin," I said, my voice steady, "you can't apologize for what you didn't care to notice." He winced, but he didn't argue, didn't try to explain. He just stood there, a stranger in the doorway of a home that no longer felt like his. I stepped back, my hand on the door, ready to close it. "I'm not coming back," I said, my words final, not cruel, but firm. "Not to this house, not to your videos, not to a life where I'm just a shadow." Tessa's sobs grew louder. Franklin's eyes glistened, but I felt nothing. No guilt, no regret, only the weight of a decision made. I closed the door, the soft click louder than any shout, and turned away, the drizzle outside a gentle hum against the windows. The house was mine again, if only for a moment, its silence a canvas for something new. I thought of the community center down the street, the old sewing machine in my closet, the life I could build without their cameras. The pain was still there, a dull ache, but it was mine to carry, mine to heal. I'd closed the door on Tessa and Franklin, on their apologies and their world of filters. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive, full of possibility. I was no longer their prop, no longer a shadow. But what does it mean to build a life when you've spent decades being unseen? The days after that gray afternoon stretched into weeks, and I began to find my footing in a world I was making my own. The air in my new home carried the scent of fresh paint and old wood, a blend of beginnings and memories that grounded me. I'd left the Los Angeles suburb behind, trading its manicured lawns and hollow grandeur for a small house in New Hampshire, nestled in a quiet town where the trees turned fiery red each fall. The house was modest, its clapboard walls weathered by years of New England winters, but it was mine. No cameras, no ring lights, no taped marks on the floor, just a space where I could breathe. I stood in the living room, my bare feet sinking into a woven rug I'd found at a local market. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting soft patterns across the hardwood, warming the space in a way the Los Angeles house never had. My hands, still lined with the weight of 72 years, held a cup of tea, its steam curling upward, carrying the faint tang of orange zest, a nod to the cake I'd never gotten, a quiet promise to myself. The silence here wasn't oppressive. It was a gift, a canvas I could paint with my own colors. I'd spent the first week unpacking, each box a step toward reclaiming myself. My old sewing machine sat in the corner, its metal gleaming under a layer of dust I hadn't yet wiped away. I'd brought my journal, too, its leather cover worn soft by years of secrets, now filled with new words. I am enough. I wrote it every morning, a ritual as steady as the sunrise, a reminder that I was no longer Martha the grandmother, Martha the mother, Martha the prop. I was just Martha, and that was more than enough. The community center down the street became my anchor, I'd walked in one morning, drawn by a flyer pinned to a bulletin board. Craft classes wanted, share your skills. The memory of my mother's hands, guiding mine through needle and thread, had pushed me forward. I'd signed up to teach, expecting a handful of retirees looking to pass the time. Instead, I found a room full of women, some my age, some younger, all hungry for something real. They gathered around my table, their eyes bright as I showed them how to stitch a simple quilt, each thread a story, each knot a piece of themselves. "Like this, Martha?" one woman asked, her fingers fumbling with a needle. I leaned over, guiding her hand, my voice soft but sure. "Exactly. Pull it tight but not too tight. Let it breathe." She smiled, and I felt a warmth I hadn't known in years, a spark that grew with every class. The women came back, week after week, bringing their own fabrics, their own stories. We laughed over tangled threads, shared quiet moments over tea, built something that wasn't for likes or views but for us. I started sewing again, not for Tessa or Franklin, but for myself. My hands moved with a rhythm I'd forgotten, crafting scarves and quilts that carried the colors of my new life, deep blues for the New Hampshire sky, warm oranges for the cake I'd yet to make. I sold them at the local market, my small table tucked between stalls of honey and handmade soap. "This is beautiful," a woman said one day, holding up a scarf, her fingers tracing the stitches. "It feels alive." I smiled, my heart swelling, not because she bought it, but because she saw me in it. One evening, inspired by a younger student's suggestion, I set up my phone on a tripod and started a live stream. I was nervous, my fingers clumsy as I adjusted the camera, but I spoke anyway, my voice steady as I showed how to embroider a simple flower. "It's not about perfection," I said, holding up my work, the petals uneven but bold. "It's about what you feel." To my surprise, people watched. Dozens, then hundreds, mostly older women like me, their comments a chorus of encouragement. "You're inspiring us, Martha." This makes me want to try again. I wasn't Tessa, chasing millions. I was just me, sharing something real. And it was enough. The hashtag began to spread, a quiet rebellion against a world that told us to fade. I saw it on my phone one night, the screen glowing in the dark of my room, and felt a pride I hadn't known I could claim. I wasn't just teaching stitches, I was teaching strength, the kind that comes from choosing yourself. My classes grew, the community center buzzing with new faces, new hands, new stories. I bought a better camera, learned to edit, not for fame but for clarity, to make sure every lesson was clear, every voice heard. I thought of Tessa sometimes, her tear-streaked face, her broken channel. I thought of Franklin, his weak apology, his absence. The pain was still there, a dull ache like a bruise that fades but never quite disappears. But it no longer defined me. I'd built something new, not from their validation, but from my own silence, my own strength. I walked to the market each Saturday, my quilts folded neatly in a basket, my steps light despite the years. I sipped orange tea in the mornings, the taste a quiet victory. I was free, not from the past, but from its hold on me. The doorbell rang one evening, sharp and unexpected, cutting through the quiet of my home. I set down my needle, my heart quickening, not with fear, but with curiosity. I knew it wasn't a neighbor. Too late for that. I stood, smoothing my dress, and walked to the door, the floorboards creaking under my feet. Whoever was out there, whatever they wanted, I was ready. I wasn't the Martha they'd known, not anymore. I'd built a life from the ashes of their betrayal, a world where my voice mattered, my hands created, my heart was my own. The silence I'd once endured was now my strength. But what happens when the past comes knocking, demanding a place in the life you fought to claim? The evening was calm, the New Hampshire air crisp with the promise of autumn, until that doorbell shattered the peace. The doorbell's chime echoed through my small New Hampshire home, sharp and jarring against the soft crackle of the fireplace. I paused, my needle hovering over a half-finished quilt, the fabric warm under my fingers, its deep orange threads catching the glow of a nearby lamp. The air carried the faint scent of pine from the open window, mingled with the earthy warmth of the tea I'd brewed earlier. At 72, I'd learned to trust my instincts, and something about that sound, urgent, uninvited, set my heart thudding, not with fear, but with a wary readiness. I set the quilt aside, smoothing my dress as I stood, the floorboards creaking under my bare feet. The living room was a haven of my own making, a woven rug in shades of blue, a shelf of books I'd finally had time to read, a small table where I'd begun sketching patterns for my next class. This was my world now, built from the silence I'd once endured, each piece a testament to the woman I'd become. But the past, I knew, had a way of clawing its way back. I opened the door, the cool evening air rushing in, carrying the scent of damp leaves. Tessa stood there, her face pale under the porch light, her eyes wide with a mix of hope and desperation. Beside her was Logan, his small frame bundled in a too large jacket, his brown eyes fixed on me, bright but uncertain. The sight of them stole my breath, not because I'd missed them, though a part of me ached for the children they'd been, but because I'd thought this chapter was closed. "Grandma," Tessa said, her voice soft, almost pleading, "can we talk?" I stepped back, gesturing them inside, my face calm despite the storm stirring in my chest. They entered, Logan's sneakers scuffing the rug, Tessa's hands fidgeting with her phone before she shoved it into her pocket. The living room felt smaller with them in it, their presence a ripple in the quiet I'd cultivated. I didn't offer tea or a seat. I stood, my arms crossed, waiting. "What do you want, Tessa?" I asked, my voice steady, each word deliberate. She took a breath, her eyes darting around the room before settling on me. We wanted to see you," she said, her tone rehearsed, like she'd practiced it on the drive over. "Things have been tough, you know, after everything. I've been thinking a lot and I want to make things right." She paused, glancing at Logan, who shifted uncomfortably, his hands stuffed in his pockets. "We thought maybe we could do a video together, like Grandma reacts to her viral fame. It could be big, Grandma. It could show everyone we're okay now." The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of disbelief through me. A video. After all this, her betrayal, my pain, the life I'd built without her, she still saw me as content, a prop to salvage her shattered channel. I looked at Logan, hoping for a flicker of the boy who'd whispered truths to me, but he avoided my gaze, his shoulders hunched. "Logan," I said softly, "is this what you want?" He shrugged, mumbling, "Tessa said it'd be cool." His voice was flat, rehearsed, and it broke something in me, not my resolve, but the last thread of hope I'd held for them. I turned back to Tessa, my eyes narrowing, my voice low but sharp. "Tessa, do you think a camera can fix what you broke?" She flinched, her lips parting, but no words came. I stepped closer, the firelight casting shadows across my face, my words measured but unyielding. "You didn't come here to apologize. You came to use me again, to turn my life into your redemption arc, but I'm not your prop anymore." Her face crumpled, tears welling, but I felt no urge to soften. I'd seen her tears before, staged for her followers, and these felt no different. "Grandma, please," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm trying to make it right. I know I messed up, but we're family. Doesn't that mean anything?" Family. The word stung, a reminder of the love I'd poured into them, only to be met with indifference. I thought of the quilts I'd sewn for Tessa, the stories I'd told Logan, the birthdays they'd forgotten. Family wasn't a word you could wield like a shield. It was a bond you earned, and they'd broken it. I looked at Logan, his small face torn between loyalty to his sister and something softer, something that remembered me. "Logan," I said, my voice gentler now, "you don't have to do this. You don't have to perform for anyone." He bit his lip, his eyes glistening, but he didn't speak. Tessa reached for his hand, pulling him closer, her voice rising. "Grandma, stop. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just one video. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. The words echoed in my mind, each one a nail in the coffin of our past. I straightened, my hands steady, my heart calm despite the pain. "Tessa," I said, my voice clear, final, "not every apology needs a camera. If you want to make things right, start by seeing me, not as content, but as a person. Until then, there's nothing more to say." I walked to the door, opening it, the cool air rushing in, carrying the scent of rain and earth. Tessa hesitated, her face a mix of anger and defeat, then grabbed Logan's arm and pulled him toward the door. "Fine," she muttered, her voice bitter. "You'll regret this." But her words held no weight, not anymore. I watched them go, the porch light flickering as they disappeared into the dusk, the sound of their car fading into the night. I closed the door, the click, soft but resolute, and leaned against it, letting the silence settle over me. The fire crackled, its warmth a quiet embrace. I thought of my classes at the community center, the women who saw me, the quilts that carried my story. I thought of the life I'd built, not from their validation, but from my own strength. Tessa's return hadn't shaken me. It had solidified me, a reminder that I was no longer theirs to define. Tessa's visit had tested my resolve, but I'd stood firm, choosing myself over her cameras. The life I'd built was mine, real, unfiltered, woven from the threads of my own strength. But what does peace look like when the past no longer holds you, when you're finally free to live as you? The days after Tessa's departure unfolded softly, the New Hampshire autumn painting my world in hues of fire and gold. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the faint earthy tang of frost. I stood on my porch, a mug of orange tea warming my hands, its steam curling upward like a quiet prayer. The New Hampshire town stretched out before me, its streets lined with maples ablaze in reds and golds, their leaves drifting to the ground in a slow, graceful dance. At 72, I'd learned to love these moments, the stillness, the simplicity, the way the world felt alive without needing to perform. This was my home, my life, and for the first time, it felt wholly mine. I took a sip of tea, the citrus bright against my tongue, a reminder of the orange cake I'd yet to make, a promise I was saving for the right moment. The porch creaked under my feet, the wood worn but sturdy like me. Inside, my small house hummed with the warmth of a life I'd built, quilts draped over chairs, a sewing machine humming in the corner, a shelf of journals filled with words that were no longer secrets. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, rich with possibility, a canvas I painted each day with my own hands. I'd started my morning walks a few weeks ago, a ritual as steady as my classes at the community center. Today, I set my mug down and pulled on a scarf, one of my own, woven in deep blues and oranges, its threads carrying the story of my reclaiming. The street was quiet, the only sound the crunch of leaves under my boots and the distant call of a crow. I walked past the market, its stalls still shuttered, and the library where I'd begun borrowing books on embroidery techniques. Each step felt like a declaration. I was here, I was enough, and I was free. At the community center, my live streams had become a beacon, not just for me, but for the women who joined me, their faces lighting up my screen from across the country. I set up my phone on its tripod, the camera's lens no longer a threat but a tool, one I controlled. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice steady, warm, as I held up a half-finished quilt. "Today, we're stitching a pattern inspired by autumn, bold, free, unapologetic." The comments rolled in, a chorus of connection. "Martha, you make me feel like I can do anything." This is my favorite part of the week. I smiled, not for the camera, but for them, for us, for the community we'd built without filters or lies. One woman, Ellen, had written to me after a class, her words lingering in my mind. "You've shown me that age isn't a cage. I'm 65, and I'm starting over because of you." I'd read it aloud during a live stream, my voice catching, not from sadness but from pride. We were more than our years, more than the roles we'd been assigned. We were creators, dreamers, women who refused to fade. The hashtag had grown, a quiet revolution spreading through comments and shares, a reminder that our stories mattered. I thought of Tessa less often now, her tear-streaked face a fading memory, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Franklin, too, had receded, his absence a wound that no longer bled. But Logan lingered. I saw him in the small moments, the way a student's son laughed, the way the leaves skittered across the street like a child at play. I didn't hate him for following Tessa that night. He was just a boy, caught in her storm. But I hoped, quietly, that he'd find his own way, that he'd remember the grandmother who'd loved him without a script. As I walked back home, the sun climbing higher, I passed a group of older women from my class, their voices bright as they waved. "Martha, you coming to the market tomorrow?" one called. I nodded, my smile real, unforced. "Wouldn't miss it," I said, and meant it. The market was my stage now, not for likes, but for connection, for the joy of sharing what I'd made. My quilts sold faster than I could stitch them, each one a piece of me, a story of resilience woven into every thread. That evening, as I sat by the fire, my phone buzzed with a new comment on my latest live stream. It was from Logan, his name a jolt in the soft glow of the screen. "Grandma, I watched your video. I get it now. You're important." I paused, my needle still in hand, the words sinking in. They weren't an apology, not exactly, but they were his, unprompted, real. I set the phone down, my heart warm but steady, and returned to my stitching. Logan's words were a gift, but they weren't my foundation. I'd built that myself. I looked out the window, the stars beginning to pierce the darkening sky, their light clear, unfiltered. Peace wasn't the absence of pain, it was the presence of myself, whole and unafraid. I was no longer the woman who'd stood in Tessa's spotlight, no longer the mother waiting for Franklin's call. I was Martha, teacher, creator, a woman who'd found her voice in the quiet. And that voice I knew would carry me forward, free. I'd found peace in a life I'd built, a world where my voice was my own, my hands wove stories, and my heart was free. The past no longer held me, but one question remained. What would it feel like to celebrate myself, not for a camera, but for me? The answer was closer than I'd ever imagined. The autumn deepened in New Hampshire, and my 73rd birthday approached, carrying a promise I was ready to keep. The air was sharp with the scent of frost and pine, the New Hampshire morning draped in a soft mist that clung to the trees like a whisper. I stood in my kitchen, the warmth of the oven wrapping around me, filling the small house with the bright, citrusy tang of orange cake. The batter had come together slowly, my hands steady as I grated zest, each motion a ritual, a reclaiming of a dream I'd held for years. Today was my 73rd birthday, and for the first time, it felt like mine. Not a performance, not a prop, but a day to celebrate Martha, whole and free. The kitchen was a haven, its wooden counters cluttered with mixing bowls and flour-dusted spoons, the window above the sink, framing a world ablaze with autumn's reds and golds. My scarf, woven in oranges and blues, hung over a chair, its threads catching the sunlight that spilled across the room. I wore a simple dress, soft cotton against my skin, my silver hair pulled back in a loose braid. At 73, I carried my years not as a burden, but as a badge, each line on my face a story of strength. I slid the cake into the oven, the door closing with a gentle thud, and set a timer. The act was small, ordinary, but it felt monumental, a promise kept, a gift to myself. I'd spent decades waiting for others to remember, to care, to bring me the orange cake I'd loved since childhood. But today, I wasn't waiting. I was enough. The community center had become my second home, its rooms filled with the laughter and stories of women who'd become my family, not by blood but by choice. I'd invited them to join me tonight, not for a grand party but for something real. Tea, cake, and the warmth of shared moments. The thought brought a smile, unforced and light, as I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced at my phone. My live streams were still growing, the hashtag a quiet anthem for women like me. But today, the camera would stay off. This was for us, not the world. A knock at the door broke the quiet, soft but steady, not the urgent demand of Tessa's past visits. I crossed the room, my bare feet brushing the woven rug, and opened the door to find Ellen, one of my first students, her gray hair tucked under a knit cap, her arms full of a quilt she'd finished. "Martha," she said, her smile wide, "I couldn't wait to show you this, and happy birthday." Behind her stood others, Mary, with a tin of cookies, Sarah, holding a jar of homemade jam, women whose hands I'd guided, whose stories I'd heard, whose strength mirrored my own. I stepped back, my heart swelling as they filled the house, their voices a gentle hum, their laughter warming the air. The living room, once a stage for Tessa's lies, was now a sanctuary, its walls echoing with connection, not performance. We set the table with mismatched plates, poured tea into cups I'd found at a thrift store, and shared stories that needed no filter. "To Martha," Ellen said, raising her cup, her eyes bright, "for showing us what it means to live true." The others joined in, their voices a chorus, and I felt tears prick my eyes, not from pain, but from a joy so deep it ached. The cake was imperfect, its frosting uneven, but it tasted like childhood, like love, like me. I cut slices, passing them around, and watched as my friends savored it, their smiles mirroring mine. This was what I'd longed for, not the spectacle of Tessa's cameras, not the hollow promises of Franklin's apologies, but this, a room full of people who saw me, who chose me, who stayed. As the evening deepened, the fire crackling in the hearth, I thought of Logan's message, his small voice reaching across the distance. "You're important." I'd written back, a simple note sent yesterday, inviting him to visit when he was ready. No cameras, no scripts. I didn't expect a reply, but the act was enough, a door left open, not for my pain, but for possibility. Tessa and Franklin were shadows now, their betrayal a chapter I'd closed. The pain lingered, a faint echo, but it no longer defined me. I'd built a life stronger than their lies. The women left one by one, their hugs warm, their promises to return real. I stood on the porch, the night air cool against my skin, the stars sharp in a sky unmarred by city lights. The house was quiet again, but not lonely. I returned to the kitchen, picking up a leftover slice of cake, its orange frosting bright even in the dim light. I took a bite, the flavor bursting on my tongue, and closed my eyes, letting the moment settle. This was peace. Not the absence of hurt, but the presence of myself, whole and unafraid. I'd spent 72 years waiting to be seen, but now at 73 I saw myself. My quilts, my classes, my voice, they were mine, not for likes or validation, but for the joy of creating, of being. I was Martha, and this birthday, this life was finally mine.